So our intent today was really to kind of explore the future as something that's already in place maybe, and to think about how we deal with that if that is the future. So there's been a bunch of other forums where folks have talked about what does it mean if we dramatically shift rate design in Wisconsin. We're not going to argue the merits of rate design. We're going to kind of come at this from the perspective that, okay, if the world changes, how does behavior help efficiency happen in that changed world? And the first person who we're going to hear from is Steve Kyman. Really, it's something Steve said at an earlier Baxter meeting that prompted this discussion. Steve shared a little bit about the MG&E rate case a couple of months ago at one of our meetings, and one of the things he said was, you know, as the economic rationale for efficiency disappears, behavior is going to become more important. And I thought, oh, that's a really interesting way to think about this. What does that mean for behavior, kind of thing? And so that's mostly what we're going to try to explore today, but we're going to let Steve kind of set the stage for this future scenario we're going to pretend to live in, and then we'll talk about how behavior works in that.
There's a question mark in my title, which I've found actually in defending things is really nice when you have a question mark, because people don't like what you say. You go, I'm just asking a question. Okay, so here's what we're going to do today. So I'm going to, rather than take an exact proposal, I am going to take a hypothetical approach which mirrors that. And one of the reasons I'm trying to do that is, and just being respectful of the utilities, they're so sensitive about their proposals that if they're ever discussed in any kind of setting, they want to know what is said and exactly. And I don't mean to be, we're not arguing the merits here at all or anything, but I'm going to just give you something that's pretty close to what is at least being considered, but I'm going to do it over a little bit of a longer time frame. I just hypothetically said, let's say this concept gets phased in over 10 years. It could be 2 years, 3 years, 15 years, something. But if the utilities had their way, and this is for a residential rate. Right now, residential rates, you pay about $10 a month fixed. So this would be your bill, and you can see the trajectory is the idea is to push these fixed charges up. This would be your bill if you use no electricity in a month, and you can see that the pushes, and that could be, the upper bound could be 60, 70, 100. I've seen all sorts of different proposals, but basically a lot higher fixed charges. And the reason is, if you take a snapshot in time and you think about MG&E's system, it's a power plant and then the transmission off of the ATC, substations, distribution lines, poles, trucks, office buildings, none of which vary if you use one or fewer kilowatt hour or one more kilowatt hour. In the very, very short run, their fixed costs dominate their structure. It's about 80% of their structure, approximately, something like that. Now, in the long run, though, that's actually not true, because everything's variable in the long run, but we're not going to really dive into that today. I'm just going to talk to you about if the utilities ruled the world, we would see something like this on the fixed charge. And then this is not a revenue enhancer. They're going to collect the same amount of revenue, and so the volumetric charge follows in inverse behavior and goes from about 15 cents a kilowatt hour and then would go down again to about 4 cents. Now this could be 2 years or 10 years or whatever, but you get the basic idea. And this is the part that is the challenge for efficiency, because this cost is sunk. Doesn't matter what you do, you're going to pay that cost regardless of how much energy you use. So changing your usage does not affect that number. So from an economic point of view, what's at the margin is the volumetric fee. So this is per kilowatt hour. And down here, so at this upper one, if you save 1 kilowatt hour, you reduce your bill by 16 cents. Down here, you would be reducing your bill by 4 cents. So that's a ratio of 4 to 1. And so this makes economic or energy efficiency much less attractive. The initial proposals are more of this nature, though. Now I'm talking a little bit more about the real proposals, just so you can follow if you're following the cases. So this is now kilowatt hours along the axis here, and then your bill. So the initial proposals, at least the ones that are currently pending before the Commission, are only for slight increases in the fixed charge and slight decreases in the volumetric charge. If this happened, and that's all that happened, we wouldn't be having this discussion because it wouldn't make that much difference. The problem is if we go all the way to, so this is just the the second dot on the line, on the chart. If we go all the way to the end, and it could even be more extreme than this, it's the slope of the line that's the problem for energy efficiency people. Your bill just doesn't change that. Under the black line, which is current, your bill changes substantially as you use more or less electricity. Under the red line, it doesn't change very much. It's hard to manage your bill. And we see that people who have low usage will see noticeable increases in their bills. And people who are high users will see noticeable reductions in their bills. So from an ex post point of view, people that have been all else equal have been more efficient will actually, some people view this as a penalty. And this is a reward for profligate behavior. So I'm editorializing here a little bit. That's what some people would say, okay? But basically but the real problem from going forward, which is what I'm more concerned about, is this signal. It's the inability. Typical usage is right around, for residential customers, right in this range. And let's say 300 to 800. You can see under the existing bill rate, your bill changes noticeably. But under the red line, doesn't change very much. So these are the same volumetric. This is that same volumetric chart that I had before. Again, phased in over 10 years, just hypothetically. And the little black number next to the dot is we start with an energy efficiency measure and so this goes directly to what you guys need to talk about. The payback under some hypothetical efficiency measure is 3 years. The number as you go down the line is how that payback increases because the savings will decrease from the energy efficiency measure as the volumetric rate drops. So we go from 3-year payback. At the extreme, it goes to an 11-year payback. Same measure, same energy savings in terms of kilowatt hours, but a lot less savings in terms of dollars. So it costs the same to put in, but you just don't get that much of a return. So we could see that if your payback cutoff was, say, 5 years, once we get out to 2018, people will stop putting in this measure all else equal. Okay? Any questions on that? It's just a reduction in the payback from efficiency increases or the return decreases. Now, I think we should be careful, even though I know you're going to talk about this as what if it did happen. I don't think we should assume that it's necessarily going to happen. I think it's worthy of a discussion because there has been substantial pushback, and some people like Don and other people have been involved in pushing, right? That's how are your muscles stronger now from all the pushing you've been doing? There's been substantial pushback. There could be alternatives. In some ways, this actually might be something that in the end, makes it worse for utilities, not better. In the short run, they recover their fixed costs. It's a risk-reducing kind of an investor protection strategy. But in the long run, I'll talk about that. I just want to throw out these little twists here on the side because I don't think we should take this as a fait accompli. It might happen, but we don't know. This is from New York, but it's a good chart. If we went to, one of the problems we have is this sort of blocky fixed. We have these averaging components. We have a fixed charge and a volumetric charge, and that's all we have. Well, the cost of producing electricity varies substantially in the real market and like in the generation market. And this is a good example. It's in New York on a hot day in July. So those are dollars per megawatt hour over here. So you have to divide by 1,000. Thank you. And you would get, so normally electricity, so we think of like the cost of generating electricity in Wisconsin would be $30, $40 a megawatt hour on a regular, not hot day, which is 3 to 4 cents a kilowatt hour. And that would be down in this range. Down, you know. But notice what happens. So you see the temperatures, 85, 84, 77, 81, 90, 94, 94, 97. On those days, and this just happens to be from the New York Independent System Operator, but we could, it's just easy. I had ready access to this data. I could find some for the MISO day. It would look similar on a hot day. But now we're talking about, on this hottest day, 90 cents a kilowatt hour, which is a lot. What if we actually priced retail service like that instead of assuming that we have to have an average rate for the whole year? So what I'm saying is, as we go into time, innovations in pricing may present us with all sorts of alternatives to that straight fixed variable. That rate design is called straight fixed variable. I just want you to be aware that there's action in this area to sort of, if we could get this to transfer. Now, in terms of efficiency, this has implications. This means getting an efficient air conditioner is probably could be worthwhile, but appliances that run 8,760 hours, there's only a few of these, and so it would change the mix of efficiency measures, and it makes demand response really attractive more than efficiency. So what comes has all sorts of twists and turns as well. That's one variant. And then the thing where I said, could this rate design actually be bad for utilities? If you think about it, what this rate design does is makes it expensive to use smaller amounts of electricity. Well, so if you've got, if you want to do distributed generation, solar PV, and you still need backup from the utility you're out here, well, one thing you could do is say, well, I'm just going to bite the bullet and do it anyway and pay pay high electric rates. Or I'm not going to put in solar PV, I guess, because it's too expensive. Or I'm going to actually go off the grid. I'm going to get solar PV, and I'm going to have a generator in my basement, and I'm just going to go off the grid. That high fixed cost rate design actually pushes some people in this direction. If this becomes a real cost-effective package, it could push a lot of people. So this is another thing in sort of where we might end up in sort of a middle road position. So I think this is the handoff to you, Kathy, well, okay, I've told you that right now, if we go down this path, the price signals will be substantially muted for efficiency, but we know that that's not the only reason people do efficiency. So, ta-da! Are any questions on what yeah. To the extent that they add fixed assets, so let's say they're replacing substations or a new generator comes online, something that, yeah, then that number could keep going up. To the extent that they retire assets as they depreciate things, this number could come down. But you're right. I'm assuming a static system, and I'm just spreading it out over 10 years. But if we think about what might happen here, if the utilities continue in their existing way of being, they'll keep adding fixed assets, and so the pressure would actually be upward more than downward. But if we're getting more load from distributed generation, when they retire some assets, they may not need to replace them, and so that could actually be lower. So we're kind of in a dynamic world. So if you have retail access, that is going to affect your generation costs, because what retail access is doesn't pay for distribution. So all of this stuff that I've talked about would stay the same on distribution, because that cost is not avoided under retail access. So you would get a different generator cost, which is volumetric. What's already volumetric in MG&E's case. It really wouldn't change anything. You just get a different volume, I mean, a slightly different volumetric rate.
Terrific. Thank you.
Yep.
So Steve did a great job of setting the stage for us, and my intent is really to have a conversation. And to have a conversation is good if everyone knows each other's names. It strikes me that I should have done that to begin with, but yeah, it's early in the morning, and I've apparently not had enough coffee. I don't think I even said. I'm Kathy Kuntz with Cool Choices. Let's just go around and introduce ourselves, just who you are. We're going to, Ingo's going to try to move the mic around for folks to talk as we go through this. And really, my aim is to set this up a tiny bit and then to throw out some questions for folks. So Steve did a really nice job of presenting sort of a scenario for us. And in Steve's scenario, paybacks go from 3 years to 11 years. So the economic case for energy efficiency is a lot tougher. I think, and this is sort of based on my own experience running efficiency programs, the other thing that's going to be part of that new normal in that scenario we're talking about is a level of customer anger and/or frustration. We saw this in Wisconsin when the utilities did rate increases, some of the utilities around some power plant construction, that customers would come to focus on energy and say, this is all a big trick. I reduced my usage and they raised my rates. And definitely feeling like this was a plot against them kind of thing, which I think is a really important thing to think about from a behavioral perspective. Because what those customers said to me then was, I'm not going to do anything else because this is just, it's a fixed game. And that's, I think, a piece of the reality. Susan Shelton, the Shelton Group, talks about how they're hearing that nationally in things, that either we've overpromised the savings from energy efficiency to customers when we tell customers that their lighting costs will go down by 75%. We don't tell them that lighting is 6% of their residential bill, and their bill doesn't go down 75%, so they're not very, so they feel like this is a trick kind of thing. So that's sort of the scenario then that we're dealing with, okay? But, of course, we're all still in the business of we want people to adopt energy efficiency measures. We want them to install clean energy systems. So how do we get there from here? And so our discussion today is sort of what's in a behavior toolbox that might help us. What are some of the kind of standard ways we think about influencing behavior that might be a way to spin efficiency to get somewhere? And I'm just going to throw out examples and invite people to throw out ideas. The first most obvious one is feedback. You know, this is the area of behavior where we've seen the most movement in the efficiency world. This is home energy reports fall in this category, you know, telling people what they're doing, maybe giving them some sense of how they compare to other people, but really feedback sorts of devices. And, you know, do folks have thoughts on how else we could do feedback? For example, one of my colleagues used to say that she thought we should invent a device that hooked to people's mailboxes, and when you were using more electricity than your neighbors, your mailbox would glow. And not only would you get feedback, your neighbors would get feedback. And sort of ways to think about, are there ways to make feedback more public to create something there? Phil?
I've wondered at times whether there are ways to take home energy reports like this and maybe implement some element of social networking, kind of creating teams with your friends, with your neighborhood, this type of, you can select who you are publishing this information to. It's still your choice as the consumer, but you can get this kind of team element, oh, it's me and my family going against my neighbor next door, and perhaps that could drive a different degree of participation. Maybe people would feel more compelled to keep on top of what they're doing.
Right. If the feedback somehow were more public. I'm pretty sure my second, yeah, it's this, how it ties to kind of social norms in particular.
I just want to say, over the years, I've judged a number of young entrepreneurship competitions, and that using technology to provide feedback comes up every time that young people are putting together new business proposals. So there's a lot of interest in trying to say technology can solve this problem in lots of different ways.
Giving people more real-time data. Tracy?
I like the idea of feedback, but I'm thinking that if we could break it down into the components, and what I mean by that is I think that the majority of people, unless you're an energy geek, don't know what the costs are that comprise their electric bill. They don't know what fixed charges are. They don't know what variable charges are. So if there would be a way to break those out so you could see, what you're doing impacts that portion of your bill and have an understanding. And I think about this in terms of my mortgage. I know what goes into the cost of owning a home. I know that there's property taxes. I know that there's insurance. I know that there's interest that I pay in my mortgage. And I know that if I shop around for a better rate on insurance, then that portion of the cost of owning a home will decrease. I know that if I refinance my home, then the interest rate will decrease. And I wonder if somehow doing some kind of education of what the components are along with some kind of feedback might be an idea.
You can go.
Along a similar line, I worry that the feedback is going to get harder because, as you pointed out, the bill will give feedback, and it's going to give negative feedback on things that people think they've done. Hey, I've done a lot, and now I didn't see any change. So I think we need to address not just the feedback, but also why would you want to save energy? What's the motivation?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, Ingo. As you say that, it makes me think about, in our own work at Cool Choices, we never give individuals specific feedback on incremental actions they take because we think it will lead them not to take incremental actions. That when I tell people that you save $4 a year by turning off the water when you brush your teeth all the time, people lean back in their chairs in a typical audience and go, cool, I don't have to think about that anymore. So so there's a way that we have potential to give people all kinds of incremental data about what they're doing with smart meters, but it may not be in our best interest to do so. Phil brought up the social piece of this. What about, we know that people are deeply influenced by their peers, that much of what we do every day is about what other people do. The big challenge for us in energy efficiency is how invisible it is. Most people don't have any idea what anyone else is doing about energy efficiency. Here in Madison, and we're energy geeks, so folks know this, you can go to the MG&E website and type in your neighbor's address and see what their annual energy usage is. And a bunch of people in the room are nodding that you've done this. I have a neighbor that it makes me crazy, because really, who could use that much electricity? But that's so the information is out there. But most times when I tell people you can do that, they go, "What? You mean for my house?" Like, yes, kind of thing. So how might we leverage social? How do we make this thing that's so invisible more a social thing? Shannon.
So I don't have necessarily a great idea, but I have maybe a start to brainstorming. There's something in the ice bucket challenge, in the fact that very quickly people wanted to do it. I was in Norway, and people were doing the ice bucket challenge from around the world. Everyone that we met was talking about the ice bucket challenge because it was just hot at that time, and I didn't know that it was in Europe as well. So I think that there's some way to make something simple and leverage the social side of life. And I think that using a Facebook or something social media and just doing something like that to raise awareness and trying not to copycat it would be valuable.
Can you explain the ice bucket challenge so everybody knows what it is?
I forget. I even now forget the organization. So there was a charity that I don't entirely know, ALS, right? Where people started. They either had the choice to dump a bucket of ice water on themselves, or have someone else dump ice water on themselves, or donate money to this charity. And then you challenged other people, and then it just kept growing towards the number of people that got involved and engaged. I was shocked that the number of people I saw doing it on vacation.
And it's a really interesting example because dumping ice water on yourself has nothing to do with ALS. I mean, I think part of what's interesting about Shannon's point for people to think about is how to make something viral that might not be perfectly technically accurate in the energy efficiency realm, which is a really hard thing for all of us to swallow. But, you know, regular people need stories that are compelling. They don't need BTUs to the third decimal point kind of thing. And so thinking about how we might tell a story around this, a social story that's viral, is a good place to think about this. So social norms become super effective. The other really effective place is nudges. So the research on nudges, some of it is things like in a cafeteria, when you put fruit at eye level versus potato chips, kids eat more fruit. When you hire new employees and default them into the 401k versus defaulting them not into the 401k, vast majorities of employees join the 401k. We take a lot of signals and follow them. So when I think about nudges, the most obvious thing is kind of upstream efficiency programs. How do you make sure that what options consumers see in the store are the efficient options? That the Energy Star option is at eye level, not stuck. I mean, in the early years when we were promoting CFLs, remember I'm twice as old as most of you in this room, the big challenge was the CFLs were down there on the bottom shelf in the hardware store, and even if you were looking for them, you couldn't find them. And how to get retailers to put them at eye level or on an end cap. That was a huge victory when we got CFLs on end caps, kind of thing. So how else might nudges or sort of their close cousin prompts fit into this? Other thoughts about that? How do you make efficiency the default in other ways?
I guess I'll go on this one. On one extreme, regulation and standards really are a form of nudge, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about individual choices and decisions. I think, for me, this ties into what's easy to do, but it also ties into personal values and kind of making it easy to do what people want to do anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Question is, how do you get there? I think part of it is the social, and part of it is maybe the messaging needs to change. If it's not about saving money, the messaging around energy efficiency maybe then needs to be to key into other internal intrinsic motivators people have. Make it easy, but complement it with messaging.
Mm-hmm. Steve has this.
So right now we're doing some work on cold water washing. And one thing that you could do is have the default setting to be cold on a washer, because I always have to. I can't figure out how to change mine from warm.
I can't figure out how to change mine either.
So if it came out of the factory on cold,
mm-hmm.
that might be a nudge.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. There are all kinds of equipment that the default settings are crazy.
It may be putting the cart before the horse, and maybe we can't really change the language until we've got. Until we have more of a systemic change in place, but it seems like if we started talking about inefficiency as the exception, and right now energy efficiency is the exception. You have to do energy efficiency. Right. You have to actively do this. If the language were changed so that it was now discussed, that's the normal, The efficient measure is just what you do. And then we start talking about, well, why are there so many inefficient things out there? You know, start to discuss those as the outliers. Perhaps that could kind of help to reframe the way we think about it.
I think that's a really interesting idea. And think about like an industry like HVAC contractors. How powerful would it be if they said, do you want the ECM furnace or the inefficient one?
So you've just raised a whole new paradigm. What HVAC contractors talk about is outside our control. So far, we've been thinking about what can we as a field do. How would we get manufacturers, installers, the trades to change how they talk about?
Right. Well, and most nudges are going to involve some kind of trade ally. I mean, it's about where someone else is putting stuff or something.
I'm just thinking about other examples, like you were just talking about. What if the microwave didn't have the default that the clock was on all the time, but you could turn it on if that was important to you, or all the other things that meet these needs that we don't have, but the manufacturers have decided, oh, the consuming public really does have these needs. But the default is always, yes, we're going to provide it, as opposed to making a default that we're not going to provide this, but that is an option that you could turn on if you wanted.
It seems like a challenge here for the folks in the room implementing efficiency programs is those are like, okay, now we have to collaborate with other entities across the country and how we get to take credit for how much. There's some, but it also may be part of the new normal that, okay, we have to go after more of that stuff. Tracy.
This is a really wonderful point to expand upon, you know, having the default be the energy efficient position. So on your set-top boxes and your video games, having the default be that if it's been on for more than, now I don't have any kids and I don't have a video game, so I'm just saying this may not be workable in the real world, but if it's been on with no activity for more than, 45 minutes or 90 minutes, that it turns itself off. I mean, we like those automatic things, we don't have to think about them. And then that brings energy efficiency into the realm where you don't have to think about them. It's an expectation. And I wonder if it would be helpful if we, banded together to explore some of the consumer acceptance of this type of feature or benefit, and then we could work with the trade organizations and manufacturers to say, here's an extra feature or benefit that you can sell with your coffee maker, with your microwave, that a differentiator in the product.
Right. Yeah, again, that becomes, a lot of the nudges become really meta opportunities there. So one of the other things that behavioral research tells us is that human beings have a really strong need to be consistent, to be viewed as consistent. And my graphic of this is how we disapprove of people who flip-flop. This kind of, which is really, if you think about it, about potentially getting more information and making a better decision over time, but that's really not, I mean, there's a pretty strong bias about, no, you should be consistent with what you've done before. When I was thinking about this, it was like, okay, that whole cohort of people who've saved energy in the past, it seems like there's a potential to engage them around that and say, okay, the paradigm has changed, but you're still this person who does the smart thing. Are you going to flip-flop in some way? And I don't totally have, one of the phenomenon in the energy efficiency industry that's always worth noting is we don't have a lot of repeat customers. When you look at data nationally, most households have participated in one efficiency program who've participated in an efficiency program. They haven't participated in a bunch of efficiency programs, kind of thing. So the national trend is that efficiency programs touch people once tied to something and don't kind of get them coming back. But there's a very real behavioral need for all of us to do things that are consistent. And if I bought the high efficiency dishwasher, there's reason to think I should also buy high efficiency lights and a high efficiency furnace if that case is made to me, kind of thing. So there's an interesting kind of consistency piece in this. There's on commitment, really interesting research. Cialdini cites a lot of the research where they went into neighborhoods and got people to sign a petition, and if people signed this petition, they were then much more willing a week later to let them put this huge obnoxious billboard in their front yard for the same cause because they'd signed the petition. And they were on record supporting this. So they couldn't now go, well, no, I don't support that. This was the next ask kind of thing. So thinking about how we might leverage people's past efficiency as part of their identity. Ingo.
So this point and this topic reminds me of something we learned in a plug load study we did in Minnesota in 2009. Interesting little story I want to share. We were looking at what kinds of small, everyday, plugged-in things people use and whether we could do anything to encourage them to use them more efficiently, use them less. And we were kind of dubious that the small energy savings would motivate behavior. But what we found in the interviews is people really had the idea of waste resonate with them. So when we were able, after a month of metering their computers, when we were able to tell them, oh, this is interesting, did you realize that 70% of the time that your computer's on, nobody's using it? They reacted to that. And in the interview, we saw them say, well, what can I do about that? I don't want that. And they didn't care how much it would save them to turn it off. They didn't like the concept of waste. They were brought up to not waste, and not wasting or not wanting to waste got them to even ask us in the interview, where we weren't trying to get them to change anything. They asked us, so how do I change that? How do I enable that power saving setting that I thought was on? I think there's something to this that people already, or at least a large share of people already don't like the concept of waste. We could piggyback onto that. And for younger generations, maybe climate change is something that's more important to them than it is to older generations. Maybe there are values like that we could build off of with that sense of commitment.
Right. Well, and here in Wisconsin, and I haven't seen this data recently, but I wouldn't expect that it changed. You know, historically, when we ask households, how do you think your efficiency compares to your neighbors, about 80% of households in Wisconsin think they're more efficient than their neighbors. So there's a, how are you behaving to be consistent with that picture of yourself? I mean, certainly in our work, we leverage that. You know, we see players who come into the game saying, oh, I'm way more efficient than other people, and as we start pointing out things they could do that they aren't doing, they kind of have to take a bunch of those things on, because after all, they said they were green, kind of thing. So I think there's an interesting thing here that we haven't necessarily leveraged a lot in the past that could give us some fodder. Plus, there's all the fun flip-flop analogies there. Another, thing you will read in the behavioral literature is that people are influenced by key authority figures, whoever you think those key authority figures are. That was fun to just go, who are some key authority figures? Yeah, these random choices. Semi-random. So are there ways to leverage some of that in what we do, kind of thing? Who might be a person to sort of showcase their efficiency as a way to influence others? Tracy and then Seth.
this is a little humorous here because I see the image of, I hope that's Angelina Jolie up there, and as Ingo was talking about this idea, I was thinking, okay, so you get, Brangelina on television, going down the red carpet saying, well, I'm saving the polar bears because we just changed all our lights out to LEDs, or, something like that doesn't really seem connected, the polar bears and the LEDs, but maybe gets the message across in a different way.
Or to a different audience.
I think you touched on something that's very important, starting with consistency and then going to identity. I look at my own house and the types of energy efficiency and solar stuff that I've done, and there's no payback period for the whole thing. I didn't save that much energy. I spent $20,000. Well, maybe it'll be 20 years or something like that, but not with the rate structure change, certainly. I did it because I just sort of thought, well, this is the right thing to do. It's who I am. Right. And if we're only thinking that we'll be successful advocating for efficiency to people who view it as, I'm an environmentalist or something like that, then that's not going to get very far. And especially if the economics are, 2% of something that's 10% of your disposable income, and you're only going to do it for a short period of time. It is effectively nothing, and then your fixed charges go up, and you end up paying substantially more. But when you put up the slide, I thought, authority. Are these people authority figures, or are they more like identities that we relate to? Like some of the celebrities only may influence my behavior because I admire them or I like them. There's no
they don't
control my behavior in any way.
Yeah. I think that's fair, that it's sort of a celebrity/authority group of people. Another really key thing in the behavior literature is scarcity. It's why retailers run sales. Because if we say limited time, we get people to do things. Are there ways to think about efficiency opportunities in a scarcity mentality? We've tended to want to make sure everyone who can do things, but maybe there's a program model that leverages scarcity, that gets more results faster because the limited time frame to do things. Thoughts on that? Certainly has been the case in the renewable energy realm when incentives are changing or federal tax credits are shifting. See very clear sort of spikes in activity that don't facilitate a long-term market, but do make action happen. Scarcity is, we all, about one thing or another, are influenced by scarcity. No
Kathy,
thoughts?
I actually have two quick thoughts on that. One is, don't miss your chance for climate change. It's take action before it's too late, which will resonate with some people and not with others. But I also see a connection here to demand, peak demand, and if we could get people thinking more about it's not us against the electric company, it's us together as a society using electricity, and there are times that we want to conserve and push that mentality more. Maybe there's, you can start making some inroads to behavior there during times that we can say, hey, there's some scarcity right now because we're using an awful lot. And it's inefficient for all of us because we're going to the least efficient production modes.
And I think it was California somewhere talked about peak usage in rush hour analogies. So not being on the road when everyone else is on the road, not using electricity when everyone else is using electricity. That was an analogy that people could make sense of. And it's not really the road's fault. It's, we shouldn't all set out simultaneously kind of thing is a way to think about that. Tom?
But just let me challenge that. I mean, the assumption you don't want to be on the road during rush hour is because you're inconvenienced. Your life isn't, there's something worse about your life for doing that. What's the analogy for using electricity during peak times? If there isn't the penalty from the economics, then there's absolutely nothing.
Right.
That
it's not like your TV slows down because the other people are using their
or your
TVs
lights are half as bright.
Right.
Or, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think it's an interesting. Only in very extreme circumstances does something happen there. Okay. So switching sort of behavior change theories a little bit. Community-based social marketing would say the most important thing is to identify and remove the barrier. I would argue that in this scenario, one of the big barriers we have, the Rhino in the road, I found some really fun photos for this is unusually fun photos for me, gang. Is customer anger and frustration about feeling like the rules changed on them. How do you think we get past that in a scenario where we're already, to some extent, nationally in that scenario? That, I mentioned earlier, the Shelton Group sees in most of their research now a level of frustration that efficiency didn't pay off for me, kind of thing. Thoughts about how to remove that barrier?
It seems like we haven't talked too much about the coolness factor. I mean, one of the reasons that people like renewables is because they think it's cool and it's visible. So maybe there's some way that you can combine renewables and efficiency so that people think you're cool. There was this person at the Energy Summit last week, I think from Freiburg, and people asked, how come all these people ride bikes in Freiburg? Is it economics? Is it something else? She said, mostly I think it's because people think it's cool. So there's a coolness factor, I think, that may be one way to get over barriers. And maybe tying it in also into smart meters somehow and technology, like Tom was talking about earlier. When Steve put on the graph the 90 cents per kilowatt hour during peak times, I thought, well, that's got to be a huge incentive right there if there's a way to convey that the time of use, and the cost of that, and there's got to be a price signal there. And somehow combining a lot of different things together, coolness, price signals.
Other thoughts on this? The piece that I keep, and kind of tied a little bit to what Don just said, I keep coming back to is it seems to me that this Rhino is in the road if people sort of only see their energy efficiency investments in sort of an economic relationship with their utility. If you can link that to broader kinds of things, this is part of your overall waste reduction, this is part of your commitment to healthy living with your family, this is part of something bigger, it's part of what makes you cool, then it really sort of doesn't matter or it matters less what those utility rates are in that. Phil?
I know one thing that was mentioned was that having this sort of kind of not very tangible thing of BTUs to the third decimal place. It doesn't make it very personal for people. One place where people are really good at conserving a resource is, let's say, a community around a shared lake where they all feel some sense of ownership. If there was some way to create a more concrete sense of these are our energy resources, this is how they actually are limited, and we as a community are sharing this responsibility, this kind of sense of we're caretakers of this resource, and perhaps that would get people more in the mind frame of not wasting it, of conserving it when they have the opportunity.
Right. right. Thinking about some community aggregate.
So you've just gotten back to the idea of scarcity. Energy is scarce, which I think will resonate with some people, but I think others see technology and drill, dig as the solution. So I think then we start separating based on some values, ideology.
Right.
But
right.
it would
Well,
resonate on one side.
yeah.
I think this is getting back to scarcity, though.
And a lot of that is framing. Look how that framing slide came at the right. You know, it's thinking about how we present this in a way that, you know, moving from an economic frame, thinking about a scarcity. Much of it is the framing. You know, there's lots in the behavioral literature about how we frame things. Do you frame them as losses or gains? We know people are much more sensitive to losses than gains, kind of thing. Are there other ways to think about framing some of this that moves us forward? I'm watching time, and I'm going to just kind of zip here a little bit. This one is really, so in the behavioral literature, it's super clear that sort of across the planet, in cultures, in human culture, there's a strong reciprocity value. If you give me something, I need to give you something. There's this need for reciprocity. Now, what's fascinating to me about this is in the realm of energy efficiency, we've been giving people free energy audits since the beginning of time, and it hasn't really worked out for us. And I was thinking about that and going, okay, is part of the trouble that this really nice person gave me a free energy audit? And if it's from like this, is there something disconnected in the way that that works, that I thanked the nice person who gave me the audit? Maybe I gave them cookies before they left, but the efficiency program behind them that wants something in reciprocal isn't really in the relationship. I don't know. But I think reciprocity is an interesting one for us to think about from a behavioral perspective, because in lots of the rest of sort of commerce, reciprocity has a really important role. Free samples get people to buy things. I have colleagues in this industry who think you should never take a free sample unless you are committed to buy it.
I have a question about this that maybe you can answer, or maybe Marcus, on reciprocity. Does it have to be an individual, or could it be an organization? Could it be a non-human entity like, well, could it be society? Could it be the earth? Can you create that kind of reciprocal obligation to things that aren't an individual in front of you, or is it always going to be
yeah,
a person?
I guess my sense of reading is that it's stronger at the individual level, maybe, but you probably could.
It's stronger, but it certainly works with organizations, and if you can somehow frame it that the planet is giving you something, and that it would be a nice thing to reciprocate. I was also, while you were talking, I was wondering whether, like younger generations, whether we could somehow frame it sort of schools, children coming home, giving your parents, hey, I mean, you're getting, I'm providing you with so much enjoyment and on a daily basis. Is there anything you can give back to me? And actually what you could give back to me is that you do something for the planet that I'm going to live in when I'm adult. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Kathy, before you move on, I just had a thought that connects the Ice Bucket Challenge with this and the idea of pay it forward. Maybe there's a way of combining all of those things.
That's an interesting, yeah, because that very much is the maybe there is a core reciprocity kind of thing there about paying forward. I think I have just a couple of others. So there's Cialdini and others talk about liking. So it turns out that salespeople who have names similar to yours are more successful at selling to you than people who have really different names than yours, kind of thing. There's like a whole, we're comfortable with people who seem like us, kind of thing. Which I think, when we think about this from an efficiency program, speaks to targeted messaging. Speaks to not having one message that should work for everyone, but thinking about how do you have ambassadors to different communities that will resonate with that community. I have a fun, social, and easy there because, of course, I had to kind of thing. The how do we make this better and simpler? I want to just how do we build on? So from an organizational theory perspective, one of the really important things is to sort of figure out who's still saving, and how do we get more people to do what they're doing? Why are they doing that kind of thing? So finding the success stories and building on them versus the other kind of thing. And I think that was the... So I just want to give people a chance to other thoughts on...
Yeah, the other thought that I had is timing. So I just moved a couple months ago, and the lighting is terrible. The furnace is really old. Washer and dryer and the dishwasher is probably new from 1978 when the house was built. And you know, the first thing that we did though was tear out the carpet and paint the walls because all the walls were super dark. But maybe there's a program out there, an opportunity when, you know, people just move into the house, that there could be this, you know, bundle. I was just sort of overwhelmed with everything that we needed to do. But like I said, you know, we just chose to do the other options. I'm sort of chipping away at putting in lighting like LEDs, and then when I did that recently, my wife said that the lights are too bright. So maybe there's an opportunity there. You know, I don't know what the percentage is of people that move, but I think timing is also really important. And then even during like some kind of negotiation, if, you know, the potential buyer could somehow negotiate more energy efficient, you know, to make their house more energy efficient, there could be an opportunity there. So just wanted to throw that out there.
That we didn't really talk about like benchmarking opportunities or things earlier, but yeah, there's certainly some stuff there, and thinking about that moment of messaging.
I very much like your presentation, and as you know, but maybe not most other people here, is I actually teach a class designing and testing social interventions, and you just gave a 15-minute version of my one-semester class. And and so we know about all these behavior change techniques. We know that they work. They have been empirically tested, and I have no doubt, and then there are different ways to implement them, and that's what my students and I think about on a near daily basis. So the only question is, so if you give me a budget, I think I can go into some small town in Wisconsin, use all these behavior change techniques, and I'm still convinced that I could reduce energy consumption by 20% after 2 years using all these behavior change techniques. But the question is, what would be a mechanism to then implement something like that in a large scale? And I mean, there was recently a competition, and we made a suggestion like that, and our solution was not retained. It was not funded. What was funded was another proposal. The proposal was to do meditation at the workplace combined with education about climate change. So the people who were in the funding agency and the jury decided to fund that, and a priori it doesn't sound super attractive to me. I don't know what you think about that. But what their strong point was, they had a mechanism of how it would be implemented. Their argument was meditation reduces the number of days that people are sick every year, and it increases productivity of employees. So employers have an incentive to implement that intervention or that meditation workshop or whatever it is, which will then be combined with climate change, and therefore it will work. So even though a priori something that doesn't sound extremely exciting, education about climate change, we sort of know that doesn't work, right? That appeals to certain people in certain funding institutions, but only because they had a mechanism of how it would be implemented on a large scale. Employers around the country will use it. The problem is, I don't know if you have a different idea, we don't have a plan. We know how to change behaviors, but who would then do it? Who would be the agency who implements these behavior change strategy across the country? Would it be locally, local politicians or institutions or neighborhood associations? And I think that's sort of the element that that I think
well, and
I'm
think,
missing.
Yeah, the way I was sort of positioning this today was it's sort of the utility or state level efficiency programs who might have a role in doing that. But I do think some of these things have scaling issues that are different than a traditional incentive program that is kind of easy to roll out at a statewide level or a whatever level. A lot of this gets a little bit messier than that. If you've got Angelina Jolie taking a position, those become national kinds of things. Some of the things we talked about around equipment immediately become national, and there are a lot of tricks to who gets to take credit for things like that that make it really difficult for the efficiency folks to think about that kind of thing. I don't know if other people have thoughts on that or other. I'm watching the time, and I want to let people have a minute.
I love this idea by Marcus, and I think there's a fantastic opportunity here in the MG&E territory. I don't know, whoever here is a MG&E customer, you would have received a letter from their CEO, Gary Walters, saying, we had to do this thing with rates, but we're going to have a community involvement to try to figure out what the next best step is. I think it's a tremendous opportunity for the university to get involved at this point and actually, throw out some of these ideas. Make MG&E your pilot community here and try to, hawk them on 20% savings if you think you can do it. Another thing I was thinking about on was community solar, which is, I think, something that MG&E is thinking about. So about 70% of those in our community can't do solar because the roof is in the wrong direction. They've got shading and whatnot. And so the idea of community solar is that the utility or some other group puts in a big solar system somewhere with, where there's no shading, and then sells components of it. And where this has been done in other places, a few places in Wisconsin and other places, is people really like this idea of owning a couple panels, and they sell out right away. So maybe there's a way to attach owning the solar, your portion of the solar panel with some type of energy efficiency metrics. You're not allowed to buy something unless you have a really low kilowatt hours per person or something like that.
Or even just thinking about it's an interesting, even the commitment piece of it. If you're going to be an investor in this, of course you're going to be committed to reducing the usage at your house so that the solar you produce over there in the community solar isn't being all wasted on your set-top boxes that are never in use kind of thing. And so there definitely are ways to, I think, link behavior into some of those, these behavioral change strategies into some of that. Less behavior change, more how we get people to adopt efficiency in general behaviors. And with that, I'm going to shut up. You want to, I could thank people for coming. It's always fun to do this. We're excited that we have a group of folks here.
As far as this discussion goes, kudos to you all, and thank you to Kathy and to Steve for leading us off and for the facilitation. I think you guys had great insights. If there are topics here that you want to discuss further, please let us know. Send us an email because we can make that additional conversation happen.
Yeah, we're looking for ideas for first quarter 2015. We've got, so in December at our Beck meeting, folks who are presenting at the National Behavior, Energy, and Climate Change Conference are doing a poster. We'll have an opportunity to do a dry run for Wisconsin folks. But then we're starting to talk about our first quarter 2015 meetings and what we do. So if you've got ideas, if there's something you really think we should spend one of these mornings doing, let one of us know. Yeah, and that's Ingo or Chris Schultz-Biechner or Letitia Young or Terry Lutz.